What's happening, everybody? My name is Marcus Liufau-Wright, and this is The Art of Marcus. What I'm about to dive into today is a, a gentleman by the name of Coleman Hughes. His way of thinking, at least, is something that I subscribe myself to when it comes to societal issues, more specific, the issue of race. It's similar to how I think about these things within the American context. And so I'm about to get into this video. It was almost 2 years ago, called Implicit Biases, and I think it's going to be very interesting, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, so I mean, implicit bias is. I mean, you take this test where that occurs on the order of milliseconds, where you're asked to associate words like good or bad with black or white faces. You can do this with anything. You can do it with apples and oranges, and how fast you associate one thing with a positive word versus a negative word, you get a score that sort of spits out the degree to which you're implicitly biased against one or the other. And I mean, the obvious thing to notice about these tests is that there's a reason they're done on the order of milliseconds. It's because when you expand the range to seconds, you can't find any bias.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't have to do it in terms of milliseconds quicker if they could find that you were biased on the order of seconds and minutes. At this point, it's mainstream. I think it's a mainstream reading of the psychological literature that implicit bias does not predict real-world bias at all. And this has been admitted by one of the founders of the implicit bias
really?
test. Yes. That knowing someone's implicit bias score doesn't give you any predictive power as to whether they will discriminate in real life. So I mean, there's a lot of hype around this, but at this point, it's just it's been totally discredited as a method for predicting real world bias.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting. At least my way of thinking was implicit biases were, to me, they were powerful. But then when described in that way, I gotta dive into this. Let me just think this through.
I mean, it's so interesting to me because countries, I mean, at least when I heard about the whole Starbucks thing, which is like, for quick context, these two black guys came into Starbucks. They were sitting there. Apparently, they didn't buy anything, and one of the workers called the cops on them to escort them out, which, caused a lot of outrage over that, saying that it was racially motivated call or whatever. But the result of that was that Starbucks closed down. What was it? They closed down.
Closed down 8,000 of their stores for a day of anti-bias trainings.
Yeah, which would make me think if they're willing to lose that much money, like, what is the result of this thing? Or is it just the most expensive PR campaign?
It is that. Yeah, I mean, again, there's no evidence that anti-bias training actually reduces implicit bias. So it's totally just covering their behinds.
Wow.
So I mean, the way I look at this is in a country of
Bro, if assuming it is true, 'cause I haven't dived into the literature itself, the psychology literature of this whole studies. I do give Coleman Hughes like the benefit of the doubt of not lying about these studies, and so I'm gonna trust him in that certain sense. But I do believe it's important for people to go into to kind of like just fact check it. It's quick to do. It only takes you literally probably like 5 minutes more of your time, depending on what you're searching up.
in a country of 350 million people, something that has a 1 in a billion chance of happening to you on any given day will happen to it'll happen to someone like 3 times a week or twice a week, right? If you just look at the probability of it, a 1 in a billion chance in a country that's a third of a billion will happen to someone somewhere every third day. So as long as there's someone with an iPhone there to film it, or a journalist who's incentivized enough to publish it, it can seem like there's an epidemic of some issue when in fact there's a 1 in a billion chance of it happening to you on any given day.
Where do you get that 1 in a billion number?
Well, Well, I'm making that number up. I'm saying if say it just is the case that you have a 1 in a billion chance of getting struck by lightning every day, then with those odds, someone will get struck by lightning in the U.S. at once every 3 days, because we have that many people. So it can seem like there is that there's an outbreak of this thing happening, when in fact it's actually very rare. So, I mean, another way of looking at this is that a big problem with the way people look at racist incidents. Let's just assume the Starbucks was a racist incident. It's actually unclear that it was, but let's just assume for the sake of argument. People look at racist incidents like this with a kind of the mindset of it like a disease. So think of something like smallpox. Smallpox used to be a huge issue, and it's the kind of issue where it's not enough to get rid of 90% of it or 99% of it. It really is useful to find the last person in the world with smallpox and make them not contagious, and just you never hit diminishing returns fighting something like smallpox. It really is worth it to get down to the last case. But then think of a problem like homicide, for example. Like the homicide rate in New York used to be 10 times as high as it is now in the 90s. We've gotten rid of 90% of the problem, but it's still 200 or 300 people in a city of 8 million get killed every year. What would it take to get the homicide rate in New York down to 0, right? It could be done, but it would require a completely totalitarian top-down solution, putting cameras inside of everyone's houses and marshaling the police to do nothing else but try to prevent homicide. It would be unlivable. It would not be worth it. You would hit diminishing returns trying to get the homicide rate literally down to 0. So many people view racist incidents as a kind of smallpox scenario, where it is worth it to continue fighting it down to the very last instance. Where I view it as much more like the homicide problem, where you can reduce racism and racist incidents 90%, and it could be the case that you just hit diminishing returns at a certain point, because in a country of 350 million, there will always be enough bad people to justify a few racist instances that don't indicate a trend or an epidemic. And we just have to, it's interesting that we just don't have these intuitions about homicide. Like no one is scandalized by the fact that there were 200 homicides, 200 or 300 homicides in New York last year. But if there are a couple racist incidents at a Starbucks, it's a national scandal. No, I mean, this doesn't make any sense. They're treating it like a disease outbreak, right? Which is, in my view, the definition of a moral panic.
I think that a lot of that.
The problem, at least within like just the news, like social media, the phones, having access to this flux of information, this flux of opportunities, this flux of just accessibility, that people can take advantage of these little pockets like social media. Within this flux, social media is where the consumer is. It's where the majority of people are within America. And so the media knows that, and this is where I have a problem with the media. Just going off of what Coleman Hughes was saying, like that this incident happened a couple years ago with those two black guys in Starbucks. He hit it right on the head. That I have heard more about that story within my circles, or just like on my timeline. I've heard more about that story more than I did the 200 to 300 homicides in New York. We should treat homicide more seriously than we do these racist instances.
I guess anyone who's not black assumes I just have to go with what I hear the black experience is like. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes back to the issue of certain voices being promoted in the black community and others being pushed down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the future for this conversation? Because like we mentioned earlier, this is almost an impossible conversation to have. I mean, what do you think? I don't know. Are you hopeful? What are your thoughts?
I have a policy against making predictions because almost all predictions are wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to expect. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to do my part, but we'll see.
Yeah. Is there anything else about this issue that you want to get out there, you wish was out there more, but you don't see enough of?
I think we covered a lot.
A
Of
lot.
ground. Yeah.
We covered a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on and like really hashing all of this out because your work.
This was my first time watching this. Well, just the way it started, just for a person who bought into the idea of these implicit biases. I still believe it's important in its own right, but then to find studies, the actual studies of it not working, and even corporations buying into that idea with knowing that it doesn't work. It's the narrative, man. It's the media's narrative. If what Coleman Hughes said was true, to know that like a big corporation like Starbucks was using it just as a PR move, kind of gives into my skepticism about this society. I am still hopeful. Just well, I'm gonna have to think this through more. But I just thought this was an interesting video to kind of like watch. And if you want to just hear more of this, or just let me know what type of videos I should be reacting to, or who I should be listening to besides Coleman Hughes, or if there's a subject that you want me to touch on, please feel free to do so. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification button for more content, and we'll be doing more of this soon. Thank you all for your ears and eyes, and I appreciate you all. Peace, love, aloha.